Hello and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. So today's topic was requested by a listener, and it's for powerlifting, and we're going to be talking about the meet day, so like competition day. So we're going to cover a little bit of the topics that they wanted to know about, related to kind of like how to handle your training going in towards the meet, how to handle like weight selections, even discussing things about like cutting weight, how to do sodium loading for the competition day, and some of the other kind of do's and don'ts and whatnot. So, anybody who doesn't know what powerlifting is, I'll be surprised if you're going to invest the time into listening to this, but if you do, freaking great for you. So, powerlifting is a competition in which you would squat as much as you can for one repetition. Okay, so you get 3 attempts in front of judges who have standards that they judge your lift by. So you get 3 attempts to make the heaviest squat you can do that day. And then you have everybody in the competition kind of does all their squats. So you try, like you're in groups of like say 10 or so lifters. So you would do your squat like your first attempt in front of the judges. Everybody in your group, the other 9 or so people, they all do their first attempt. And then you get to kind of move up in weight if you want. And you get to do your second attempt, everybody does theirs. You get to move up in weight if you want, and you try a third attempt. So you get 3 in front of the judges. One of the neat things about powerlifting is you can't go back down in weight. So if you try a really heavy one on the first one and you don't get it, you don't get to go down in weight. So there's really specific ways to select weight. Make sure you start light and kind of work your way heavy. So that way if you miss one of the heavier lifts, you still get one of the lighter lifts that count. So you have to have a successful lift in the squat. And then you get to go try like 3 attempts at bench, and you have to have a successful lift at bench press to continue in the competition. Then you have 3 attempts at your deadlift. Then you would add your best squat, your best bench, and your best deadlift, and that gives you a total. So that's like the total amount of pounds that you can move between those 3 lifts. Then you are compared in weight classes, in gender classes, and even age classes. So in your specific group, whoever has the highest total wins the meet. Now, it is just who shows up that day. So it's not, they do have a database and they have records for people who've competed kind of like all time. But technically that day you kind of can compete against, like you would win a trophy or first place. It would be decided by who is at that meet. So somebody can get a first place at a meet, but definitely not be the best ever in the world, or on that database of everybody who's ever competed. So that's something that's interesting and makes it fun. We'll get into a little bit of that stuff maybe in regards to what makes like a successful day and whatnot. But in general, let's go down through the list of the questions that the listener wanted. So the first thing we would do is typically, if you want to show up on, say, a Saturday morning at the gym and you wanted to be able to do your best squat, your best bench, and your best deadlift, there is a specific way you would have to prepare for that. So if I did my normal training all week and then went in and tried to lift really heavy for all 3 lifts on one day on Saturday, that wouldn't be very good. I'd be pretty fatigued probably. You'd be beat up from your training throughout that week and you wouldn't be at your best. So typically how we kind of prepare ourselves for the meet is going to be, it's going to be different per person. But there are some general truths. So everybody I worked with, I've helped people get like national records, elite totals, accomplish very cool things in powerlifting. So I have trained people who are kind of beginners, first day ever, first meet ever, but I've also trained people who've, done 10 plus meets and, have set records and whatnot, and we've traveled kind of all over the United States for it, so it's pretty fun. So, what would be true of like a beginner plus or an advanced lifter, powerlifter, is going to be that your volume of your training would typically go down in the last, say, 2 to 4 weeks, depending on the person. So you could be safe and say 4 weeks out, you're going to start reducing your volume. So how that looks is maybe if my accessory lift, so maybe after squats, I might do, I'm just giving really generic stuff, okay? So, but maybe after regular squats, you do front squats to kind of work your core bracing and your quads, and then you do maybe RDLs to work your posterior chain, like your lower back, glutes, and hamstrings. So we'll just say we do 2 of the, like those 2 exercises after squats, okay? Maybe at 4 weeks out, I would typically do 4 sets of each of those exercises. Then at maybe 3 weeks out, I might only do 3 sets of those exercises. At 2 weeks out, I might only do 2 sets. And then the week of the meet, you might actually just totally skip those. But you can see how the number of sets, which would be your overall volume of work, would actually decrease the last 4 weeks of the meet. That allows you to kind of recover a little better. It allows you to kind of, there's going to be what's considered a realization of strength. So typically when you're training, you're kind of beat up all the time, you're working on weaknesses, and you're always skirting the edge of being really recovered or not. But when you go to a meet, you want to make sure you're fully recovered. So you would start tapering down your accessory work, doing less sets the last 4 weeks or so. So that way you can make sure that you're fully recovered by the meet day and not having any lingering soreness or tightness or any kind of muscular stress or damage on meet day. Now, what some people mess up is they'll drop their intensity as well, which is not good. That will make you feel weaker on the day of the meet. So, let's say on front squats, I was typically doing 4 sets of 6 at 4 weeks out. I might still do sets of 6 at 3 weeks out, but I might only do 3 sets of 6. Then 2 weeks out, I'll do 2 sets of 6. But I still want to keep the heaviness of that lift. So if I was doing 6 repetitions, I was probably doing that. Hopefully you would have been doing that for a very good specific reason. So your accessories would have been chosen for time under tension or rep ranges specific to what you needed from that accessory. So if you needed strength out of the muscles that were associated with that accessory, that you would have a time under tension or rep range associated with that. If you wanted muscle size out of it, you would do that. If you wanted kind of blood flow, restoration, endurance type stuff, you would have had specific reps and time under tension for that. So at 4 weeks out, you don't want to lose the effect that you're wanting from that exercise. You just don't want to dig as deep of a hole in your training. So you would still keep your intensity the same, you would just reduce your number of sets. And that would be an example of reducing volume but keeping intensity the same. So when people drop their intensity as well, you will kind of detrain your body's kind of resilience to heaviness. So everything will start to feel heavier as you get closer to the meet, which would obviously be counterproductive. So that's typically how we handle accessory work, is you decrease your volume, but you keep your intensity the same. How you handle the big lifts, the competition lifts, squat, bench, and deadlift, is roughly about the same. Is you're going to be decreasing volume as you get closer to the meet, and your intensity is either going to stay the same or it might actually slightly increase towards the meet. It depends on where you're at in your training. So I've had sometimes clients need to work on their ability to stay controlled and stable and mentally confident under heavy weights. So they might be doing kind of heavy singles, like say even from like 8 weeks out into the meet. So if they're already doing pretty heavy singles, anywhere between say 87.5, 90 and 92.5%, maybe even up to 95%, say 2 weeks out from the meet, we're not going to all of a sudden go up in intensity from there. So they're already pretty intense, so we would just decrease the volume. So maybe in their workout they were doing say 8 to 10 singles as their volume for that main lift. They might only now do 3 or 4 singles at a still high intensity, but that volume goes down. Or if you were having somebody just kind of doing a lot of repetitions to build their pathway to work on kind of the small areas of the muscle, like small muscles of the big lift, or you're working on cue execution, like whether they could, keep a certain position for multiple reps, and that was giving them awareness of body position. So you might have had them doing, say, 5 sets of 3 to 5 reps. As they were getting closer to the meet, you might only do 4 sets of, say maybe at 4 weeks out they do 5 by 5. Then at 3 weeks out they might do 4 sets of 4. At 2 weeks out, 3 sets of 3. And then the last week you might only do a couple singles, like maybe 80, 85%, 87.5, 90, 92.5, then done. So just a couple little singles to give them practice. So that's typically what you'll do with the main lifts, is you definitely wouldn't want to go down in intensity. That would be absolutely stupid because your body will feel like everything's incredibly heavy at meet day. But you do want to decrease your volume to allow less wear and tear, less residual kind of damage on your body going into the meet. So that way you don't get injured, and that's the way you can also perform your best. So if your body has any negative effects of the training, like any residual damage, whether it's to the muscles, connective tissue, or just stress on your nervous system, it'll downgrade its power output at the day of the meet because it feels it might be at risk. So you want to make sure that the muscles, the joints in your nervous system are as healed and stress-free as possible on the day of the meet, so you can have the greatest degree of power output on your main attempts. So that's typically what we would do for the workouts leading up to the meet, is you decrease your volume, but you keep your intensity the same and or increase it. Making sure you're getting up around that 90-ish%, even 92, even up to 95% for some people, depending on their strength levels. Typically, the weaker somebody is, the higher in the percentages they should train. In general, the stronger somebody is, usually the lower in the percentages they should train. Because if they're super strong, their weights are going to beat them up more than somebody who's weak. Okay, so that's kind of something that maybe people would think is kind of the opposite would be true. But I've done meets where I've not attempted a deadlift over 85% for the last, say, 6 to 8 weeks before the meet because I didn't want my lower back feeling stressed. Whereas, like, if I'm going to a meet and I'm trying to pull like 700, if I'm trying to hit like, 660 or 640, 2 weeks out from the meet, I could strain the hell out of my hamstring, strain the hell out of my back, and it might not be fully healed by the time the meet rolls around. Whereas if somebody, like a female, trying to hit like a 225 deadlift, it'd be totally fine for them to go up and practice a 200 even the week of the meet. So that way they can make sure that their body's ready for the heaviness that it's going to feel to them. So heavy is always relative. So that is the quick nitty-gritty of what to do with your lifting, okay, getting closer to the meet. So in these topics we're going to cover here, they're going to be pretty much just kind of like introductions. So if you have specific questions to any of these areas, feel free to email us at brutalironGym@gmail.com. Okay? Now, the next question we have, or the next section, is openers and weight selections. So we've already said that in powerlifting, you get 3 attempts in front of the judges. You get a chance to warm up. So you get to kind of warm up in a back room, make sure you're fully ready for your first attempt. But you get 3 attempts in front of the judges, and you can stay at the same weight if you miss an attempt, but you can't go down in weight. So say my best squat ever is 225. And I would go to the meet and I would be like, I want to make sure I try to hit that. I'm going to try that on my first attempt. And then all of a sudden you don't get it and be like, oh, okay, well maybe I'll just settle for 200. You can't do that. You can't go down in weight. So you can stay the same or you can move up, okay? So I'm going to give you guys, along the way of explaining this, I'm going to give you percentages. And what these percentages will be based off of is a known max that you can do with good, clean competition form. If you don't know if you can lift something that would count in a competition, freaking ask people. Take some videos if you need to, throw it up online, ask people in your gym, find out, make sure it's meet quality. So if you want to go to a meet, you have to squat to parallel, which is the crease of your hip, okay, has to break parallel, break the height of the top of your kneecap. So some people squat and like the bottom of their butt barely gets to the height of their knee and they'll call that parallel. Bullshit. You're going to go to a meet and you're going to bomb out. You're going to miss your lifts. Okay? So you have to squat to actual real parallel, which isn't the hinge point of like your hip. It's not, the side of your butt cheek. It's the crease of your quad. Okay? So the top of your quad where it comes and meets your midsection like your belly, that needs to go lower than your knee. So it's typically a lot lower than what people think. So make sure you get somebody who can give you an opinion, who's either educated, they've coached many people, or they've competed themselves, but you know for a fact that they've had squats that count, they've never had any issues with like missing squats. Make sure that they're legitimate. So way, way, way too often, people get told their squats are good, or like, oh yeah, that's parallel, and it's not even freaking close at all. So get somebody who's an asshole and is super strict and get them to agree to it being parallel. If you can appease somebody who's super strict, you're going to appease the judges. Okay? So we have one of our very first ever podcast way back when, I think it's in the first 50, is called Say No to Yes Men. is don't find somebody who just tells you yes all the time, who tells you how awesome you are. Find somebody who's that jerk in the gym who's hard to please and see what their opinion is. Now, don't take only their opinion, get other people's opinions, but don't just get your friends, don't just get the people who always cheer you on. Make sure you get somebody who's even qualified as a judge. That would be a great resource. Okay, so you could take a video, throw it up on Facebook or social media somewhere, ask for opinions, and then try to find somebody who has competed before and or is a judge. Those would be the best people to get, okay? So you have to attempt that before you go to a meet. If you have not knowingly done a competition standard lift for the squat, bench, and deadlift, why the hell are you going to a meet? Okay, so make sure you do that first in the gym, get a feel of what it feels like, okay? From your best lift in the gym that you know is competition quality, that's what we're going to base these percentages off of, okay? So for your opener, typically what you'd want is going to be something that you can do for really freaking hard 3 reps. Like you can do for 2 reps, maybe you could get it for 3. So you're going to set that as your first one and just do it for 1 rep. It's going to feel a little easy, that's fine, but that's going to give you the chance to kind of get used to the judges staring at you, get used to the commands, kind of get used to how the lift is, where you can still have a little bit of attention to pay for to those outside things. So if you're on a true 1 rep max, you're not going to pay attention to anything. You're just trying not to die. So you want to have something a little bit lighter to where you have some leeway mentally to focus on these other things that might steal your focus. Okay? Typically that's going to be somewhere around 87.5 to 90% of what your best known good lift is. And then another way of saying it is typically when you warm up to lifts, like say you're going to warm up to a max, you'll go through a couple light sets, you'll go through a couple medium sets, and then you have that first weight that says kind of like, ah, shit, this just got kind of really hard. Like now the workout's really started. That's typically where you want your opener to be, is somewhere on that kind of what's called the bottom of the strength window. So let's say I'm working up to a 400-pound max, and around 320, my body goes, oh crap, like this is pretty heavy. So that's the bottom of the window, and then 400 would be the top of your window. So typically your opener should be somewhere around that bottom part where your body goes, oh crap, this is getting hard now. And again, that's going to be somewhere around 87.5 to 90%. Now there's some debate, but so here's just one opinion of many. So go listen to other opinions if you want. But that's going to give you a pretty safe, pretty good opener attempt, okay? Your second attempt, what should you go to after you do your opener, okay? That would typically be a single that you could do even on kind of a bad day. Now, if your first attempt moved well, let's say you smoked the first attempt, like you did it and it felt like freaking nothing, then you're going to want to move up to either 95 to 97.5% of what your best so far is in the gym. So your 100% known good lift, you're going to move somewhere around 95 to 97.5. If you do the math, you'll hit the numbers in there, and something in that range is going to feel like, okay, that one's probably pretty good, I could try that. Whereas maybe on the top of the range, you're like, geez, freaking whiz, I don't know if I can do that. So you want to pick the one you're confident with, okay? And that's if the first lift moved well. The second, what do you do if the first one doesn't move well? Like you do it, it counted, but it was kind of shitty, and like you barely survived. Then you only want to move up to about 92.5%, maybe up to 95%, but you would make a small jump, make sure you get your confidence set, okay, before you go into your third lift. Now, sometimes people ask, what happens if you miss your opener? If you missed your opener and it went really easy, and you just missed it on a technicality, like maybe you didn't wait for the rack command, you didn't wait for the start command, or like they said you were just a little bit above parallel, but you smoked it, you were fine, move up anyhow. Do not repeat the same damn weight if it's an easy lift. So I see people do that all the time, it's ridiculous. So like they'll do their opener and moved ridiculously easy, they just messed up something technical. They'll just repeat it again, and on their third they take some dumbass huge jump, trying to get up to 100% and they die. So don't do that. Okay, so I've helped somebody get a national record before where they missed their first and they missed their second. We still moved up, even on between the first and second we moved up, between the second and third we moved up, and then they hit the freaking record on their third because they were just nervous. So due to that nervousness, they kind of didn't open up their hips well enough. Okay, they kind of stayed like, if we're nervous, we would curl up in a fetal position, right? Well, they kind of kept their hips closed and they didn't quite get to parallel. And it was simply due to nerves. It had nothing to do with strength. So after the first attempt, I told them that. I said, hey, you're just nervous. We're going to move up anyhow. You'll be fine. The second attempt, they missed again. And I said, we're moving up on this third one. And you better damn well get this because we have a whole damn meet to go here. Quit pissing around. You're strong. Just freaking get to the bottom of the damn lift. And they went up and they crushed it. Okay? So you don't have to repeat a lift just because you missed it. Be smart, okay? If you smoked it and it was easy, move up anyhow, okay? Now, if you missed it due to it not being parallel, or you missed a command and it was freaking hard as hell, then repeat the same damn weight, okay? Make sure you get one of your lifts to count. Like we said, if you don't get one of your 3 attempts to count in the squat, you can't move on for the day. Some of the local small meets will let you move on, but you don't get a total because you don't have any squat that counts. So you're just going to move on kind of for fun and experience, but you won't be able to be competitive in your placing. At large national meets, you don't even get to keep going, okay? They're not going to waste their time on you. So they're going to keep the meet going, moving faster. So that's what you do with the second attempt, okay? So if the first one moved well, you move up to around 95 to 97.5%. If the first one was kind of shaky, you move up to only 92 to 95%. The third attempt, okay, if your second one moved well as well, then either go up to 100%, crush it and feel good for the day, or be a little crazy and go to 102.5 and see if you can do something a little bit fancy that day. So if you're having a dang good day and you're moving well, have some fun. Try something cool, okay? Now, if the second one counted, but it was like, holy dear God, I about died, then you only want to move up to about 97.5%. Don't even worry about the 100. Just get a good lift and get some confidence. If you think you can still hit the 100, go for it, okay? So these are just kind of like emotional calls in the moment. When I go with my lifters, I will pick the weights for them. So because I can see the way they're moving, I can typically separate emotions from the quality of their movement better than they can. Now, they always have the ability to trump me at any moment. So if I say, hey, I think we're going to move to this, and they go, I don't feel ready for that, then I'll let them pick because they're the one under the bar, not me. So they always have the ability to kind of go over my head and pick the weights that they would feel safer with. But typically they do better if I just pick the weights for them because the people that I coach for powerlifting meets, I take care of their training the whole way to the meet. So I've watched them in person squat a million times, or I've watched videos of them squatting. So I will know how their body moves. So if they're moving well that day, but they're nervous, I'll still pick awesome numbers, and they usually have a great day. Okay. So that when you go and help somebody at a meet, you're referred to as a handler. Okay. So I would be their handler for the day. Meaning I'm just kind of there to make sure the day goes well, help them with anything they need, and I'll typically pick their numbers. Not all lifters like having the responsibility to pick the numbers because they get emotional. It's hard to kind of feel what's going on. Their body kind of goes numb. They're naturally just very kind of negative maybe. So they have a hard time picking confident things, or they're kind of psychopathically confident and they need someone to protect them. So if their best squat they've ever done is like 400 and they're like, let's do 450. I'm like, you're nuts. Get away from me. I'm going to go pick something I think could kill you. But that's typically what I do for the people I train. So I'm very selective with who I work with, and I don't work with a ton of people at one time because I want to make sure I do a very good quality of work for these people going up towards the meet. So I like having that more intimate connection with my lifters. And so it's super fun to be able to help them pick weights and kind of be there for that day. So, but that's typically what we do. So openers is somewhere around 87.5 to 90%. So anywhere in that window that makes you feel confident. The second attempt is if the first one moved well, you go to around 95% to 97.5%. Anything in that window that sounds good to you, go for it. If the first one didn't go well, only go up to 92.5% to 95%, somewhere in that window. Then for your third attempt, if the second one you smoked it, go to 100 up to 102.5%. If the second one was kind of shaky and you're not sure about it, then just go to 97.5 to 100%. Okay? So that'll give you a bunch of numbers. You can do the math for all that stuff, but that'll give you pretty much a good idea of what to do. Okay? So the next thing we're going to move on to is cutting. So cutting weight. So what happens if you want to make a weight class for your meet? If it's your first meet ever, don't. Do not cut weight. Don't do anything crazy. Just go to the meet and lift. If whatever the hell you weigh in at is whatever the hell you weigh in at. At your first meet, you're just trying to get an idea of what's going on at these meets. You're trying to just see if you can do at a meet what you can do in the gym. You're not going to worry about placing. Okay, and once again, at meets, you only place against whoever's there. So if somebody says like, oh, I got first place, but there was only one other person in their division, who gives a shit if you got first place? Okay, so it's kind of, you have to be aware of your scenario. If you go to a nationals event and there's, 10, 15, 20 people and you can get top 3, that's freaking badass. That means something. Okay, but if you go to a meet and you're first place because you're the only one in your division, that's dumb. Who gives a shit what your placing is? Okay, even if you went there and you placed a dead freaking last, but you hit all the numbers that you had planned for the day, that is a victory. Your placing means nothing at local meets. That's going to offend some people, but that's my opinion. You don't have to believe it too. It's just you have to kind of see where you're at and what's around you. So when I help people for aesthetic competitions, we always make sure we pick divisions where there's other competitors, because too often you hear somebody go to a bodybuilding show and they're like, I got first place. Yeah, out of like what, 2 people? Who cares? So you want to do the best you can do for you against you. So you are your competition, and then after you do a couple meets, you can start looking at like the state records or kind of like the record board of the database and see how good you might be compared to all of the people who compete, not just whoever shows up to some random ass meet on a random ass day. Okay, so placings at local meets don't mean much. So that means that like it would be unnecessary for you to cut weight. On your first day, on your first meet, you have a million other things to worry about. Don't add cutting weight to it. So if somebody's like, well, I want to get the experience, you have so much other shit to experience on the first day, don't complicate things. Okay? At your second meet, you can go ahead and try weight cuts. Or in your training, you can take a random day and try to do a weight cut and do a random mock meet sometime and not waste $100 if you get it wrong. Okay? So don't worry about cutting weight on your first day. Now, if you've done a couple meets and you want to make a weight class, typically the best way to do it is if you have, say, depends on body size and blah, 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 but let's say you have 6 to 8 pounds to cut and you're about a week out from the meet. That's fine, okay? The last 2 to 3 days, just replace all of your carbohydrates. Like not all, but like replace about 50% of the calories, 50 to 75% of the calories of your carbohydrates with proteins and fats, and cut your sodium. Okay, so you're going to eliminate carbohydrates and you're going to reduce sodium in the last 2 to 3 days before the meet. But you have to make sure you replace some of those calories, okay, at least half the calories that you're taking out from your carbs. So that's going to allow you to cut water weight. So what holds up water in our body, what creates like water retention in our body, is water, carbs, and sodium. So if you get rid of sodium and carbs, your body can't possibly hold water. It'll drop a bunch of water weight, which sometimes equals out to about that 6 to 8 pounds. And then you'll lose that 6 to 8 pounds the last 2 or 3 days. So you don't want to do major calorie cuts like throughout the whole last week. That's absolutely stupid. You're going to ruin your strength. Okay, so you don't really want to cut calories. You just want to replace your carbs with proteins and fats and reduce your sodium. That's going to get your body weight to go down, but it won't negatively impact your energy levels. It won't negatively impact your digestion. It won't screw you up before that last week before the meet. Okay, so that's going to be a typical baseline kind of what to do if you have like just say 6 to 8 pounds or so to lose. And what it depends, like in powerlifting meets you're allowed to do 24-hour weigh-ins or 2-hour weigh-ins, so there's a little bit of difference between all that stuff. We'll get to that here in a second, but that's generally what you want to do. Is if you have say under 10 pounds to cut, and I would say more closely like 6 to 8 pounds, is you can just simply do carbohydrate and sodium reduction, okay, the last 2 to 3 days before weigh-ins. So if you have a 24-hour weigh-in, it's 2 to 3 days before the weigh-in, not the meet. Okay, so let me switch out the video.